Some lives look beautiful from far away, but when you step closer, you find a story held together by strength, loss, reinvention, and a heart that refused to break. Priscilla Presley lived beside one of the most famous men in history, but her real journey was built from childhood pain, silent battles, private heartbreaks, and the courage to rebuild herself again and again. This is not the story of a legend's wife. This is the story of a girl who grew up without a home, a young woman shaped by a powerful love, a mother who survived losses no parent should ever face, and an 80-year-old woman who learned to rise after every storm. Her life shows that even when the world watches you, your deepest struggles happen quietly, and your greatest strength grows when no one sees it. Let's step into the life behind the name and into the truth she carried for a lifetime. Some lives don't begin with fairy tales, they begin with a fracture that shapes every chapter that follows. Priscilla Ann Wagner was born on the 24th of May 1945 in Brooklyn, New York, during the final months of World War II. Her arrival should have been a peaceful moment for her family, but the world around them was still recovering from years of conflict. Her father, James Frederick Wagner, was a young Navy pilot whose job kept him in the air more than at home. He held his newborn daughter only once before he was called away again. For her mother, Anne, that memory became precious. For Priscilla, it would become a reminder of a connection she never truly had the chance to feel. Only a few months after Priscilla's birth, tragedy struck. Her father's plane crashed during a routine flight, and he did not survive. At the time, Priscilla was too young to understand what had happened, but this loss became the first quiet wound of her life. She later said she never knew the sound of her father's voice, only the idea of who he might have been. Anne was left a young widow with an infant, facing a future she had never imagined. She did her best to stay strong, but grief has a way of settling into the small spaces of life, and Priscilla grew up surrounded by both love and a sadness she could not name. In 1948, when Priscilla was 3 years old, her mother married again. Her new husband, Paul Beaulieu, was an Air Force officer. He became the father figure in her life, and she took his last name. Paul was responsible and disciplined, the kind of man who followed routines and expected stability. He cared for Priscilla, but like many men of his generation and profession, he showed affection quietly. He was present, but not always expressive. Still, he gave her the structure her mother struggled to provide while dealing with the earlier loss. Life with an Air Force family meant constant relocation. Priscilla never stayed in one place long enough to feel settled. Her childhood was spent packing and unpacking, adjusting to new schools, new accents, new houses, and new faces. She lived in Maine, Texas, New Mexico, and Connecticut before moving to Germany when she was 13. Each move meant leaving behind whatever friendships she had managed to form. It also meant learning, again and again, how to be the new girl. This kind of life made her independent, but it also made her feel like she never fully belonged anywhere. In her school years, Priscilla was shy and quiet. She was not the child who ran into a room and made friends instantly. Instead, she stayed on the edges, watching others bond quickly, while she struggled to step into their circles. Children on military bases often formed groups fast because they understood how temporary life could be, but Priscilla found it hard to enter those groups. By the time she began to feel comfortable, it was often already time to move again. Lunchtime at school was the hardest for her. Sitting alone became normal, even though it hurt. She learned early how to keep her feelings to herself, how to smile even when she felt invisible. Her sensitivity grew from these experiences. She became someone who noticed small things, the tone of a person's voice, the pause before they answered, the look in someone's eyes when they hid their feelings. She paid attention to the unspoken, because she had grown up in a home where grief and quietness lived side by side. Adults around her tried to protect her from their worries, but silence teaches its own lessons. She learned to understand emotions without needing them explained. She learned to read people deeply, something that would shape her relationships for the rest of her life. Even though this kind of childhood was difficult, it also built strength in her. Constant relocation taught her how to adapt quickly. She could walk into a new environment and figure out how to fit in without making noise. She became resilient, though she did not think of it that way at the time. She simply learned to continue moving forward, even when she felt unsteady inside. She handled change better than most children because she had no other choice. This ability to adjust, to bend without breaking, later helped her survive many personal challenges. But behind the strength was a deep longing. Priscilla wanted something she never had: a stable home, a sense of belonging, a place where she could stay long enough to grow into herself. Moving from one state to another, and finally across an ocean, made her feel like her identity was always shifting. She often wondered who she might have become if she had lived in one town, one school, surrounded by the same people year after year. That longing for stability became one of the quiet guides of her life. It influenced the choices she made as a teenager and the relationships she later held on to, even when they were difficult. By the time she reached her early teens, she was a mixture of quiet strength and deep vulnerability. She knew how to make herself small in new environments, how to listen more than she spoke, how to adapt to people's expectations. But she also carried the weight of early loss, loneliness, and years of feeling like an outsider. She wanted connection, but she was unsure how to reach for it. This emotional background shaped her in ways she did not understand at the time. She grew up learning how to survive change, but not how to feel fully at home anywhere. When her family moved to Germany, Priscilla was 13. It was another uprooting, another round of adjusting, and another chance to feel like a stranger in her own life. She spent her days trying to blend in, doing her schoolwork, and learning the routines of yet another new place. She was not expecting anything extraordinary to happen. She simply hoped to get through each day without feeling too out of place. But life often changes at the moment we least expect it. She didn't know it yet, but every uprooted year, every silent lunchroom table, every unanswered longing was guiding her toward the night. Destiny would walk into the room wearing the face of a legend. Some encounters feel impossible even as they're happening, and yet they alter a life so completely, there is no going back. When Priscilla arrived in Bad Nauheim, Germany, she was just another teenager trying to adjust to another move. Her stepfather's Air Force assignment had brought the family there, and she expected her life to continue in the same pattern it always had. New school, new neighbors, new routines. Germany was quieter than the places she had lived before, and the town had a slow, steady rhythm. She spent her days going to class, doing homework, and trying to settle into the community. She did not imagine that anything unusual was waiting for her. In her mind, it was just another stop in a childhood full of temporary homes. At that time, Elvis Presley was also in Germany serving his military duty. The whole world already knew him as a superstar, but in Bad Nauheim, he tried to live as normally as possible within the limits of his fame. He often spent time with friends in a private home where American soldiers gathered. One evening, a family friend invited Priscilla to come along. She was hesitant at first. She was only 14, shy, and not used to social gatherings with adults, but her parents trusted the friend who extended the invitation, and eventually she agreed to go. She thought it would simply be a small visit, nothing more. When she walked into the house, she had no expectations. She did not even know that Elvis was there. She stepped through the doorway quietly, trying not to draw attention to herself. Then she saw him. Elvis looked up from where he was sitting, and their eyes met. For a moment, Priscilla felt frozen. She had seen his face in magazines and heard his voice on the radio, but seeing him in person was completely different. She felt shocked and unsure of what to do. Being only 14, she suddenly felt much younger than the room she was standing in. She was overwhelmed by the idea that someone so famous was looking at her directly. Her shyness took over. She felt exposed, as if everyone could see her discomfort. Elvis noticed it immediately. Instead of treating her like a fan or a child, he spoke to her gently. He asked simple questions about her life, her school, and her family. His voice was soft, and he seemed to genuinely care about her answers. Priscilla could barely speak at first. She was afraid of saying the wrong thing. She later said that the world would never interpret that moment the way she lived it. To outsiders, it seemed unbelievable, even inappropriate. But to her, it felt like a calm, surprising conversation with someone who treated her kindly in a room full of strangers. After that night, word began to spread on the military base that Priscilla had met Elvis. Teenagers whispered about it. Adults wondered how it happened. Some people were excited for her, while others were critical. The attention made her uncomfortable, but she couldn't stop thinking about the meeting. Elvis had a way of making her feel seen in a way she had never experienced. Soon after, he invited her to see him again, this time with her parents' permission. Her parents were unsure at first. They worried about the age difference and the attention it would attract. Priscilla herself was nervous, but the invitation felt meaningful to her. Elvis approached the situation with respect. He met her parents, spoke to them directly, and assured them that Priscilla would always be supervised and treated appropriately. His manners and sincerity eased some of their concerns. Because Elvis showed responsibility and because the gatherings were always group events, her parents allowed her to continue visiting. Over time, these visits became a regular part of her life in Germany. The more they talked, the more Elvis opened up to her about his loneliness, his worries, and the pressure he lived under. Even though she was much younger, Priscilla listened carefully. She had grown up noticing emotions that adults tried to hide, and this helped Elvis feel comfortable speaking with her. He often looked to her for calmness and understanding. In return, she began to rely on him emotionally. He was unlike anyone she had ever known. He was confident, yet vulnerable, famous, yet surprisingly private. Their time together gave her a feeling of importance she had never experienced before. The attention from someone like Elvis made her feel special, but it also created a bond that went deeper than she understood at the time. Letters, calls, and invitations became common. Elvis was preparing to return to the United States after his military service, but he still made time for her whenever possible. Priscilla began to feel connected to him in a way that made her teenage world feel both larger and more complicated. Her identity, once shaped by loneliness and quiet routines, now shifted around her interactions with him. She did not fully realize it, but she was growing emotionally attached. She thought she understood what she was feeling, but she was still very young and had little experience with relationships. What she felt for Elvis was a mixture of admiration, affection, and awe. Her parents worried about how deeply she was becoming involved, but they also saw that Elvis treated her with respect and care. They tried to set limits while still giving her the freedom to talk to him. Deep down, they likely hoped the connection would fade over time. But Priscilla's attachment only grew stronger. Elvis had become her emotional anchor during a period when she already felt uprooted from place to place. Without realizing it, she was building her teenage identity around a man the whole world admired. This early emotional dependence shaped much of her adolescence. She followed his career closely, waited for his letters, and hoped for his calls. Even though he was older and lived in a completely different world, she felt connected to him in a way that felt real and personal. For Priscilla, this was not about fame. It was about finally feeling wanted and understood by someone she believed saw her clearly. But stepping into Elvis's orbit was not an invitation into a love story. It was a step onto a fault line, already trembling beneath her feet. It is one thing to love a legend. It is another to lose yourself trying to survive beside him. When Priscilla was 16, her life changed again in a way she could never have predicted. Elvis had returned to the United States, and their connection did not fade as her parents had hoped. Instead, Letters and phone calls continued, and Elvis eventually asked if Priscilla could come to America to visit him. Her parents hesitated, unsure if this was right for someone so young, but Elvis promised she would be supervised and treated with respect. After long discussions and careful conditions, they agreed. Priscilla left Germany and arrived in Memphis, stepping into a world she had only heard about through music and stories. America itself was overwhelming, but nothing compared to seeing Graceland for the first time. The mansion was impressive, filled with expensive furniture, large rooms, and a sense of importance. But it was also strangely quiet when Elvis was not there. Despite the beauty, Priscilla felt uncertain. She was still a teenager, far from home, trying to understand where she fit into this enormous place. Elvis welcomed her warmly, and for a while she felt excited and special. But beneath the excitement was a growing pressure to adjust herself to his lifestyle and expectations. Life inside Graceland was glamorous on the surface, but not easy for someone as young as Priscilla. Elvis lived by his own rules and routines. He stayed awake late at night, slept during the day, and surrounded himself with friends, musicians, and employees. Priscilla tried to match his schedule because she wanted to be close to him, but it was exhausting. She had no guidance of her own, no school structure, and no clear identity outside of him. Slowly, her daily life shaped itself around Elvis's moods and needs. If he wanted quiet, she stayed quiet. If he wanted company, she made herself available. Her world began to shrink without her noticing. Elvis also began to influence her appearance. He suggested how she should style her hair, what makeup suited her face, and what clothes he preferred. At first, Priscilla saw this as affection or guidance. She thought he wanted her to look her best. But as time passed, she realized she was following his ideas more than her own. The simple clothes she used to wear were replaced with outfits he found attractive. Her natural makeup was replaced with heavier styles he liked. Even her hairstyles were shaped by his preferences. She wanted to please him, but she didn't see how much she was losing her own sense of self in the process. Priscilla admired Elvis deeply. He was talented, charming, and kind to her in many ways. But admiration slowly mixed with something more complicated. The more she shaped herself around him, the less she recognized herself. She began to feel like she was disappearing behind the image he had created for her. She seldom spoke up for fear of upsetting him. When she did express her feelings, she worried she sounded ungrateful. She knew Elvis cared for her, but she also knew he lived in a world where everyone revolved around him. She became part of that orbit without having the emotional experience to keep her balance. Inside Graceland, Priscilla had everything a young woman might think she wanted: beautiful rooms, clothes, attention, and the presence of one of the most famous men alive. But luxury can also be isolating. She rarely left the mansion without permission, and she had no friends her own age nearby. The people around Elvis were adults who worked for him or partied with him. They were friendly, but they were not her peers. She had no one to confide in. Her days became predictable but empty. She waited for Elvis to wake up, waited for him to call her into the room, waited for him to decide the plans for the day. Waiting became part of her identity. Over time, the tension between who she was and who she was becoming grew stronger. She wanted to be independent, but did not know how. She wanted to make her own choices, but feared losing Elvis's approval. She wanted to find a future for herself, but her world was already defined by his present. This emotional conflict showed up in her private thoughts. She sometimes wrote in her diary about feeling unsure, confused, and lonely. She questioned whether she was living her own life or simply living beside someone else's. At 16 or 17, these doubts were heavy to carry, but she had no model for a different path. Priscilla also struggled with the lack of structure. In Germany, she had school, curfews, and a family routine. In America, her life revolved around Elvis's schedule. Some days were full of excitement, music, laughter, energy. Other days were silent, disconnected, and long. She wanted to find direction, maybe continue school or explore her interests, but she did not want to disappoint Elvis by seeming less available. Her longing for purpose made her feel even more lost. She loved Elvis, but loving him came with a cost she was only beginning to understand. What made things even harder was the imbalance in their relationship. Elvis was an adult with a career, money, and influence. Priscilla was a teenager far from home, with no independent support system. She depended on him emotionally, socially, and practically. She trusted him completely, but she also needed him in ways she could not fully describe. That dependence made her afraid to speak up, afraid to ask for boundaries, afraid to show her fears. She did not yet understand that love can grow alongside confusion, or that caring for someone does not mean losing yourself. As the months went by, Priscilla adapted more and more to life at Graceland. She learned how to act in front of Elvis's friends, how to stay calm when his moods changed, and how to keep her worries private. She tried to be the girl he wanted, the girl he admired, the girl he chose, but inside, she felt a slow pull away from her own identity. She could not explain it then, but she sensed that she was becoming someone she did not fully recognize. She wanted guidance, stability, and a sense of who she could be outside of Elvis's world. Her inner conflict continued quietly, unnoticed by most people around her. She kept her feelings hidden because she believed showing them would make her seem weak or demanding. She longed for a role in life that belonged to her, not just one connected to Elvis, yet she did not know how to find it. She was still young, still learning, still trying to understand herself while living in a place where everything revolved around another person. And just when the world expected their story to become a fairy tale, the cracks beneath their perfect photographs began to widen. Some promises are whispered softly, but carry the weight of entire futures. After years of long-distance emotion and complicated connection, Elvis decided he wanted a more stable life with Priscilla. Her parents had always worried about the age difference and the unusual nature of their relationship, but Elvis approached them with a serious tone. He explained that he cared deeply for her, that he wanted to give her a settled and respectful future, and that marriage would give her the protection and commitment they felt she needed. For a family that had spent years watching their daughter's life revolve around a man who lived in a completely different world, this offer brought both relief and fear. Still, they agreed, hoping this commitment meant Priscilla would finally have structure and security. Their wedding took place on the 1st of May 1967 in Las Vegas. It was a small and private event, held early in the morning, away from crowds and press. To others, it looked romantic, glamorous, and perfect. Priscilla wore a beautiful white dress. Elvis was calm and gentle, and photographs showed a smiling couple ready to begin their future. But even on that day, there was a quiet sense of fragility. Their entire relationship had been shaped by Elvis's world, his schedule, his fame, his needs. Priscilla was now formally stepping into that world as his wife, but she was still very young, still unsure of who she was outside of him. The wedding promised stability, but it also marked the beginning of new pressures she could not yet understand. In 1968, their daughter Lisa Marie was born. Her arrival changed Elvis in a way few people expected. He had grown up poor, treated fame as both a blessing and a burden, and carried a constant pressure to perform. But holding his newborn daughter softened him. He showed a side of himself that was tender, emotional, and openly loving. He doted on Lisa Marie, held her for long periods, and found joy in simple moments with her. For Priscilla, watching Elvis with their child was one of the happiest parts of their marriage. It made her feel closer to him, and for a short time, their home felt warm and united. Their early family life was a mix of quiet, private moments and the constant presence of fame. Inside Graceland, they tried to create a normal rhythm. They shared meals, played with their daughter, and enjoyed peaceful nights together. But outside the gates, Elvis was still one of the most famous people in the world. Fans waited everywhere, reporters asked personal questions, and managers demanded more work. Even when Elvis tried to enjoy family time, he could not fully escape the life he had built. Fame followed him everywhere, and with fame came expectations, schedules, and non-stop pressure. Priscilla did her best to support him. She ran the household, cared for their daughter, and tried to match the lifestyle that came with being Elvis's wife. She wanted their family to feel whole and steady. She valued the quiet nights when he seemed relaxed and present. But these moments were often brief. Elvis's career kept expanding. He needed to travel for shows, recordings, rehearsals, and movie sets. This meant he was gone often, leaving Priscilla alone with their young daughter in the large house. The sense of family she wanted so much was difficult to maintain. As time went on, the early cracks in their marriage began to show. Elvis's touring schedule disrupted their routine. He often returned home exhausted or distracted. His sleep patterns became irregular, and his long absences made Priscilla feel lonely even when he was there physically. The entertainment industry was demanding, and Elvis felt pressure to meet the expectations of millions. Rumors from film sets also made things harder. Magazines published stories linking him romantically with co-stars. Fans believed these stories easily, and even though Priscilla tried to ignore them, the constant gossip hurt. It planted quiet doubts that were hard to shake. Priscilla and Elvis still cared for each other, but the emotional distance grew slowly. Arguments were rare, but silence became common. They often lived in separate emotional spaces, even under the same roof. When Elvis was home, he surrounded himself with friends, musicians, and his inner circle, which made it hard for Priscilla to have private time with him. She felt pushed aside without anyone directly pushing her. Their life began to feel like two different worlds trying to fit into one house. Elvis struggled too. The pressure of fame, the expectations of his audience, and the need to maintain his image made it difficult for him to settle into family life. He cared about Priscilla, but did not always know how to show it. He loved his daughter, but found it hard to balance fatherhood with the demands of his career. He wanted peace, but lived in a reality where peace was rare. Their marriage was held together by love, history, and shared memories, but it lacked the stability and communication needed to keep it strong. Priscilla often felt invisible, trapped between the public image of a perfect marriage and the private reality of emotional distance. She longed for a deeper connection, more time together, and more understanding. But every attempt to reach for that closeness was blocked by the chaos surrounding Elvis's career. Behind the beautiful photographs of their family were long nights of loneliness, unanswered questions, and a growing feeling that the life they had created together was slipping away from them. The pressure was not explosive or sudden. It was slow, steady, and heavy. It showed up in the way they spoke less, the way silence lingered between them, the way they tried to pretend everything was fine, even when they both felt the same quiet disappointment. Priscilla loved Elvis deeply, and Elvis loved her in his own way. But love was no longer enough. The weight of fame, responsibility, and emotional exhaustion was stretching their marriage thin. The closeness they felt when Lisa Marie was born was still there, but only in rare moments. Most days felt like a struggle to keep their family together in a world that constantly demanded more from Elvis than he could give. Their home remained beautiful, and their public image remained polished, but the emotional cracks were widening beneath the surface. They tried to maintain the picture of a perfect family, but inside Graceland, the truth was harder to hide. Each of them felt the shift, but neither knew how to stop it. And as the 1,970 seconds unfolded, love, once their shelter, became the very thing they could no longer breathe inside. Sometimes the bravest thing a woman can do is walk away from the life she thought she could never live without. By the early 1,970 seconds, the emotional distance between Priscilla and Elvis had grown too wide for either of them to ignore. They still cared for each other, but their daily lives no longer fit together. Elvis had a demanding career, unpredictable moods, and a lifestyle that never slowed down long enough to make space for a stable marriage. Priscilla, now older and more aware of herself, began to understand how deeply she had shaped her life around Elvis's needs and how little space she had left for her own. She had entered his world as a teenager, but now she was a woman with questions, doubts, and the desire for independence. During this time, she started practicing karate. At first, it was simply an activity to fill her days and keep her physically active. But as she continued, it became something much more important. Karate gave her a sense of control and confidence she had never felt before. It taught her discipline, focus, and strength. Each lesson made her feel more connected to herself. She began to see that she was capable of making choices and taking action. This small step toward independence created a shift inside her. It was the beginning of her emotional awakening, the first sign that she wanted a life shaped by her own identity, not only by Elvis's, but the process of breaking away was painful and confusing. Priscilla found herself torn between love and exhaustion. She still cared deeply for Elvis, but she was emotionally drained. She felt that her entire identity had been tied to him for so long that she no longer knew who she was outside of his presence. This inner conflict made her feel stuck. She didn't want to hurt Elvis, but she also didn't want to continue living a life where she felt lost. Her diary entries from that time show how overwhelmed she felt, tired, unsure, and anxious about the future. The emotional unraveling was slow and heavy. Their conversations became limited, and many feelings were left unspoken. The tension between them was not usually loud or explosive. It was a quiet distance that grew thicker each year. Priscilla spent nights thinking about what she wanted, but she feared the idea of leaving. After so many years inside Graceland, leaving felt like stepping into a world she didn't know how to navigate. Still, she knew she had to choose herself if she ever wanted to find peace. The final day at Graceland before she left is remembered for its sadness. She stood in the house where she had spent her entire young adulthood, knowing it was no longer where she belonged. One of the most painful moments came when she removed her wedding ring. It was not just a piece of jewelry, it was a symbol of the life she had built with Elvis. Holding it in her hand, she felt the weight of everything they had shared and everything they had lost. Elvis, too, felt the pain, though he didn't express it directly. They both knew their marriage had reached its end, but neither of them wanted to cause harm. In 1973, they finalized their divorce. The signing took place quietly, without drama or hostility. They sat beside each other and completed the paperwork that officially ended their marriage. Afterward, they stood up and walked out of the courthouse, hand in hand. It was a gesture of respect, not romance. They were acknowledging their history, their daughter, and the years they had spent together. It showed that even though their relationship as husband and wife had ended, they still shared a connection that mattered to both of them. After the divorce, Priscilla felt a mixture of relief and deep confusion. She was free, but she also felt empty. She had spent so long shaping her life around Elvis that she didn't know how to make choices on her own. Simple decisions felt complicated. She questioned everything about herself, her future, her purpose, her identity. She worried about how the public would see her and whether she could survive outside the Presley world. Slowly, she began to rebuild. She took acting classes, not because she expected fame, but because she wanted to push herself into new experiences. She started attending auditions and tried to develop confidence in her own abilities. This was not easy. Many people whispered that Priscilla would never succeed on her own, that she was only known because of Elvis. These comments hurt her, but they also motivated her to work harder. She focused on improving her skills and creating a life that did not rely on her past. One of her biggest turning points came in 1982, when she made the decision to open Graceland to the public. After Elvis's death, the estate was struggling financially. Keeping it closed would have meant losing the property. Many critics thought opening the home was a bad idea, and some accused her of using Elvis's legacy for profit. Priscilla, however, understood that this was necessary to preserve the home for future generations. She also felt a responsibility to honor Elvis's memory. She took on the challenge with determination, overseeing the planning, organization, and business decisions. When Graceland opened, the response was overwhelming. Fans from all over the world visited, and the estate quickly became one of the most popular tourist attractions in America. Priscilla's leadership transformed the property into a financially successful and culturally important landmark. She proved that she was not just a former wife living off memories, she was a capable businesswoman who saved an important part of American music history. Her success surprised many people, and it helped her build confidence in her own abilities. Through these achievements, Priscilla began to build a new identity. She was no longer only known as Elvis's wife. She became recognized for her intelligence, her hard work, and her leadership. She learned how to make decisions independently, how to trust her own judgment, and how to rebuild a life that had once felt broken. The journey was long and filled with doubt, but she moved forward step by step, learning more about herself along the way. But the world's judgment was nothing compared to the storms waiting in her private life. Not every love story is meant to last. Some enter our lives only to show us who we are becoming. After her divorce from Elvis, Priscilla stepped into a world where she was finally free to discover herself. But freedom did not remove the emotional weight she carried. She still loved Elvis in her own way, still felt responsible for protecting his legacy, and still struggled with her own identity. In this vulnerable space, different relationships entered her life, each teaching her something about herself and what she needed from love. One of the first was Mike Stone, her karate instructor. Their connection began during a difficult period in her marriage. Priscilla was searching for strength, independence, and a sense of belonging. Mike offered reassurance at a time when she felt emotionally lost. Their relationship grew slowly, not from passion at first, but from conversation and comfort. He noticed her exhaustion, her loneliness, and the pressure she carried. She felt seen in a way she hadn't felt in years. But the situation was complicated. She carried guilt because her marriage to Elvis was not yet over. And once their relationship became public knowledge, the media created a storm around it. Rumors and criticism spread quickly, painting the situation in harsh ways that didn't match the private reality. Their connection didn't survive the pressure. The relationship ended painfully, and Priscilla accepted that it was never the right foundation for a future. It had helped her recognize her desire for independence, but it also brought stress and emotional conflict she did not want to repeat. After Elvis's passing in 1977, Priscilla entered another relationship, this time with model Michael Edwards. She was grieving, raising her daughter, and adjusting to a new chapter of life. Michael brought companionship during a period when she felt emotionally drained. He was gentle and affectionate, and in the beginning, the relationship felt stabilizing, but over time, the emotional differences between them became clear. Priscilla had lived a complex life, full of responsibility and public attention. While Michael's world was more focused on his own comfort and needs, they often failed to understand each other's emotional depth. Even though they cared for each other, their relationship lacked the strong foundation needed for long-term stability. The real breaking point came years later, after they parted ways. Michael wrote a book that included personal details about their relationship and even comments about Lisa Marie. This betrayal shocked Priscilla. She had trusted him, shared her life with him, and welcomed him into her home. Seeing private moments turned into public content was deeply hurtful. She chose not to respond publicly or seek revenge. She stayed calm, showing dignity even when she felt personally attacked. But inside, she understood the lesson clearly. Not every person who offers comfort has the emotional maturity to respect your trust. Then came the relationship that lasted the longest, her partnership with Marco Garibaldi. They met in 1984, and unlike her earlier experiences, this connection grew slowly and naturally. Marco was calm, grounded, and uninterested in fame. He respected her history, but did not treat her like a symbol. He saw her as a woman trying to rebuild her life, and he valued her for her character, not her past. Their bond brought a sense of peace she had not felt before. They created a home together that felt warm and balanced. In 1987, their son Navarone was born, bringing new joy into her life. Watching Elvis with Lisa Marie had been beautiful, but raising a son with Marco gave her a different kind of fulfillment, one that came from stability, not chaos. For many years, their life together looked steady. They enjoyed simple routines, shared responsibilities, and focused on raising their son. Priscilla appreciated the normalcy of it. After living in environments filled with fame and pressure, she valued quiet days, shared meals, and a sense of emotional safety. This relationship lasted 22 years, becoming the longest and most stable partnership of her life. But even long relationships can change. Over time, Priscilla and Marco began to drift apart. Their goals, lifestyles, and personal growth started moving in different directions. Neither of them was at fault. It was simply the natural shift that happens when two people develop in ways that no longer match. They still had respect and care for each other, but they no longer shared the same vision for the future. Conversations became shorter, misunderstandings more common, and the closeness they once felt slowly faded. Their separation was mutual and dignified. There were no public fights, no accusations, no bitterness. They sat down as adults and accepted that staying together would not bring either of them happiness. Their priority was their son, and they continued to co-parent with kindness and understanding. For Priscilla, this breakup was emotional but not destructive. It taught her that not every ending is a failure. Sometimes letting go is an act of honesty and self-respect. Through these relationships, Priscilla learned important truths about herself. She discovered that love built on comfort alone cannot last. She learned that admiration is not the same as emotional connection. She learned that trust should be earned, not assumed. Most importantly, she realized she needed relationships that allowed her to be herself fully, not someone controlled, shaped, or overshadowed. These experiences helped her form a clearer sense of identity. She was no longer the teenager shaped by Elvis's world, or the young woman trying to find her place. She had become someone who understood what kind of love supported her growth and what kind held her back. She recognized the difference between a relationship that heals and one that slowly erases you. This understanding guided her decisions in later life and helped her build healthier boundaries. By the time she reached the later years of her life, Priscilla no longer looked at relationships as definitions of her worth. She saw them as experiences that helped her grow. Some offered support during difficult times. Some taught her painful lessons about trust. Some gave her peace she didn't know she needed. Each one revealed something about who she was and who she wanted to become. But even the deepest heartbreaks of romance could not prepare her for the losses that would soon devastate her family. There are losses that shake nations, and then there are losses that break a single heart beyond repair. On August 16, 1977, Priscilla woke into what began as a normal morning, unaware that her life was about to split in two. The hours felt confusing, heavy, and unreal. Messages came in quickly, voices filled with panic, and before she could understand what was happening, she was rushing toward the hospital where Elvis had been taken. She had lived through stress before, through rumors, through pressure, through fear, but nothing prepared her for the look she saw on the faces of the people waiting for her that day. The hallway was quiet in a way that made her stomach drop. Doctors moved carefully, speaking in soft tones that gave away more than their words. No one had to explain anything at first. She could feel the truth in the room before she heard it. When the doctor finally stepped forward, his expression told her everything. She listened, but it felt like the world around her had stopped moving. Elvis was gone. The boy she met at 14, the young soldier who once wrote her letters from Germany, the father of her child, the man she had loved in ways she could never fully explain gone in a single, impossible moment. Her breath caught, and she felt her knees weaken. Even after everything they had lived through, every change, every distance, she was not ready for this. She never imagined a world where he didn't exist. News spread instantly. Before she could even take in what had happened, the entire country began mourning. People filled the streets of Memphis. Radios broke into programming with the announcement. Reporters struggled to keep their voices steady. Fans cried openly outside gates, holding hands, praying, leaving flowers and handwritten notes against the fences. More than 80,000 people came to pay their respects, lining the roads during the funeral procession. For many, Elvis was not just a singer. He was a part of their memories, their youth, their family traditions. The world had lost a cultural giant, but Priscilla had lost something far more personal, a piece of her past, a piece of her identity, and a piece of her heart. Inside her chest, the grief felt different from what the world saw. The public cried for the legend. She cried for the man, the one who once played piano for her late at night, the one who told her his fears, his hopes, his regrets, the one who held her hand through their daughter's birth. Fame had created distance, but their connection had never completely broken. Losing him was like losing the entire beginning of her life. It was a pain that had no clear place to go, because they were no longer a couple, yet they were forever bonded in ways no one else could understand. After the funeral, when the world slowly stepped back, she went to Graceland. Walking through those rooms was almost unbearable. The house felt too quiet, as if every part of it was waiting for him to walk through the door. She touched the surfaces he once touched, stood in the places where he used to laugh, and felt memories rise so strongly they nearly overwhelmed her. She remembered him practicing at the piano. She remembered conversations in the middle of the night. She remembered their life when they were young, and everything felt possible. In each corner, she saw a version of him that existed long before fame took over. Behind the public stories and news reports, she faced her own private grief, deep, complicated, and lasting. She knew that her pain could not collapse her. She still had their daughter, Lisa Marie, who needed her more than ever. Priscilla held her close, trying to explain something that even she struggled to accept. Lisa was only 9 years old enough to understand loss, but too young to understand why it happened. Priscilla did everything she could to protect her, to help her process the sudden emptiness, and to keep Elvis's memory gentle rather than frightening. Being a mother in grief is a different kind of burden. You must hold your own pain quietly while trying to soften the pain of someone you love more than yourself. As the days passed, responsibilities fell onto Priscilla that she never expected to take on alone. Elvis had left behind a legacy that needed care, protection, and structure. His estate was in trouble, financially unstable, and at risk of collapsing under poor management. Priscilla stepped in because she knew she had to. She did it for him, for their daughter, and for the millions who still loved him. It was not easy. She had to learn business, accounting, legal processes, and public relations almost overnight. But she refused to let Elvis's world fall apart. She honored his memory by turning Graceland into a public landmark, one that would preserve his story honestly and respectfully. Taking on this responsibility helped her survive the grief. It gave her purpose. It reminded her that her relationship with Elvis did not end with his death. She was still connected to him through their daughter, through the memories they shared, and through the legacy she was now responsible for protecting. Her work allowed generations of fans to continue celebrating him, and it helped secure a future for their family. Over time, people recognized that she wasn't just the woman who once married Elvis, she was the woman who saved his legacy. But even with all of this, the emotional pain did not fully fade. Losing Elvis remained a wound that shaped her life. It was a reminder of what it means to lose a first love, a person who witnessed your beginnings, your growth, your mistakes, your hopes, and even when relationships end, some connections don't disappear. They become part of you, living quietly in your heart, long after life forces you onto different paths. She carried that truth with her for decades. She learned how to move forward, but she never forgot the weight of that day. It stayed with her, shaping her choices, her priorities, and her understanding of grief. She knew that loss does not disappear. It settles inside you, becoming a part of your story. But even the death of the king could not prepare her for the grief that would strike decades later, a grief that attacked her bloodline itself. Some pain is so profound it alters the air itself. For Priscilla, this pain arrived first in 2020, when her grandson Benjamin passed away at just 27 years old. Benjamin had always been a quiet soul with a gentle heart. He carried an emotional depth that reminded many people of Elvis, and the physical resemblance was so strong that strangers often stopped in surprise. But for Priscilla, he was simply her grandson, the boy she held as a baby, the child who ran to her for comfort, the teenager who still rested his head on her shoulder when life felt too heavy. He had a softness that stood out in a loud world, and she felt protective of him from the moment he was born. The day she learned he was gone, she felt something inside her break in a way she had never experienced before. Losing Elvis had been painful. Losing her marriage had been painful. But losing a grandchild was something different. It didn't just hurt, it hollowed her. She stood still, unable to understand how someone so young, someone with so much ahead of him, could be gone so suddenly. She kept repeating, "Not him, not my Ben," as if saying it could make time shift backward. Shock spread through the family, but no one suffered more than Lisa Marie. Watching her daughter break under the weight of losing her child was a pain Priscilla could barely survive. A mother losing her child is one of the deepest wounds a human being can experience, and Priscilla had to witness that wound open inside Lisa Marie in real time. Lisa was consumed by grief in a way that frightened everyone around her. She cried without sound, without breath, without the ability to explain how deeply she was hurting. She often held Benjamin's photos so tightly that the edges bent. Some nights she called Priscilla not to talk, but to sit in silence, two grieving hearts, trying to hold each other together while barely holding themselves. In the months that followed, Priscilla tried to keep the family from falling apart. She supported Lisa, stayed close to her grandchildren, and tried to find strength she did not feel. Grief changes a home. It changes how rooms sound, how days feel, how mornings begin. Priscilla often walked through her house and felt memories of Benjamin appear everywhere. A laugh, a smile, a moment she wished she could relive. She knew she had to stay strong because everyone around her was still drowning. But strength is not the absence of pain. It is surviving while carrying it. As they slowly tried to rebuild themselves, life continued to challenge Lisa Marie. Her financial struggles became public, often exaggerated and misunderstood. She faced debt, lawsuits, and stress she could barely keep up with. Her personal life was heavy too. Another divorce, custody issues, and constant legal pressure. Each problem added weight to the grief she was already carrying. And through it all, Priscilla stood beside her, trying to guide her the way mothers do, even when their children are grown. She listened to late-night calls, offered help, gave emotional support, and tried to remind Lisa that she was not alone. In early 2023, Lisa Marie attended the Golden Globes. Cameras captured her smiling, but Priscilla knew her well enough to notice the exhaustion in her eyes. Lisa seemed fragile, almost unsteady, like someone trying very hard to stay upright while carrying unseen heaviness. Still, no one imagined the danger she was in. 2 days later, Priscilla received another call, one that made her heart sink before she even answered. Lisa had collapsed. She was rushed to the hospital, and Priscilla hurried to get there, repeating in her mind that her daughter was strong, that she would survive this, that she had already lived through so much. But grief has a way of returning when you least expect it. When Priscilla arrived, she was met with expressions she recognized from the day Elvis died. She felt the same fear rise inside her, the same shaking in her body, the same cold understanding that something was terribly wrong. When the doctors told her that Lisa was gone, her world folded in on itself. She had lost her daughter, the child she carried, raised, protected, and loved with every part of her being. Losing a daughter after losing a grandson felt like being asked to survive the impossible twice. The days after Lisa's passing were heavy and complicated. Along with the emotional pain came legal issues involving the family trust. A change had been made in 2016 that removed Priscilla as co-trustee and replaced her with Riley and Benjamin. Priscilla had not been told, and this lack of communication created confusion, not conflict. The media painted it as a fight over money, but for Priscilla, it was never about that. It was about clarity, fairness, and protecting her grandchildren during a painful time. She handled everything quietly, carefully, and with respect for the family's needs. Eventually, the matter was settled peacefully, and the family prioritized unity instead of division. After the legal issues were resolved, the reality of her losses settled into her daily life. She now carried two absences that could never be filled. She often thought about Lisa as a child, singing in her bedroom, asking questions, or holding her hand in crowded places. She thought about Benjamin's soft smile, the way he sat next to her during family gatherings, the warmth he always brought into the room without trying. These memories lived inside her like small lights she protected carefully. Priscilla continued supporting her grandchildren, especially Riley, who stepped into her new role with maturity and strength. She watched the twins grow, trying to keep their lives as steady as possible. She also made sure that both Lisa and Benjamin were remembered with love, not overshadowed by tragedy. Grief does not disappear, but it can be carried with tenderness. Even after all this pain, Priscilla moved through life with grace. She tried to honor her daughter's and grandson's memories by staying present for the family that remained. She learned that surviving grief is not about forgetting. It is about learning to breathe through the pain and finding moments of peace in the middle of loss. And yet, even after death had circled her family twice, the world found new ways to wound her. Survival is not just continuing to live, it is choosing again and again who you will become after life breaks you. In her late 50s, Priscilla faced a challenge that had nothing to do with fame, marriage, or grief. It was something many women face quietly, the desire to look rested, calm, and refreshed as they age. She trusted a man who claimed to be a doctor, believing his promises of a natural, safe treatment. What she did not know was that he was not a licensed professional, and the substance he injected into her face was industrial silicone, something never meant to be used on human skin. The days that followed were filled with physical discomfort. Her face felt heavy and tight, and she noticed changes that frightened her. Simple expressions became painful. The mirror became a place she avoided because she no longer recognized herself. She wasn't chasing youth, she simply wanted a gentle improvement, something many people want as they grow older. Instead, she found herself dealing with the consequences of trusting someone who had no right to be practicing any kind of procedure. When the truth came out that he had harmed many women, Priscilla understood that she had become a victim of someone else's dishonesty, not her own vanity. Adding to the pain, the public reacted harshly. Tabloids showed unflattering photos and mocked her appearance without knowing the truth. People made jokes and comments online, forgetting that behind every picture is a human being dealing with real pain. Priscilla chose not to argue or defend herself. She stayed quiet, carried her embarrassment privately, and went through long, uncomfortable correction treatments to remove the silicone and repair the damage. These treatments took time, patience, and courage. Slowly, she began to look and feel like herself again. More importantly, she reclaimed her confidence. Her quiet strength, through this experience, became one more example of her ability to rise after being hurt. While these personal struggles were happening, Priscilla continued building her professional life with focus and discipline. Many people assume she lived her life supported by Elvis's money, But the truth is very different. After his death, the Presley estate was close to financial collapse. Priscilla stepped in, learned the business, and rebuilt everything from the ground up. She opened Graceland to the public, developed merchandise, protected intellectual property, formed partnerships, and transformed the estate into a stable, thriving organization worth millions. Her success was not luck, it was hard work, smart decisions, and a commitment to protecting the Presley name for the next generations. Over the years, she also made careful investments of her own. She bought and sold several homes, choosing properties that matched her changing life. She collected jewelry, art, and meaningful pieces that reflected her taste. She owned a few special cars, not for show, but because they reminded her of good memories or represented achievements she earned through her work. These things were not symbols of vanity. They were signs of a woman who built a life again after losing so much. A woman who learned to stand on her own financially and emotionally. Philanthropy also became a steady part of her life. Even though she didn't broadcast it loudly, she supported causes related to children, animals, veterans, and community programs. She gave because giving made her feel connected to something larger than herself. This quiet generosity reflected her personality: thoughtful, careful, and sincere. Her role as guardian of the Presley legacy remained one of her most important responsibilities. She did not just protect Elvis's memory, she protected what that memory meant for millions of people around the world. She made sure Graceland stayed open, maintained, and meaningful. She worked closely with her granddaughter Riley to ensure that the future management of the estate would stay stable. When legal challenges appeared after Lisa Marie's passing, Priscilla handled them calmly, always thinking first about the grandchildren and the long-term health of the estate. Family became her center in her later years. She stayed close to Riley, Harper, and Finley, trying to give them a sense of security after the deep losses they experienced. She supported Navarone's journey in music, encouraging him without pushing him. She attended family gatherings, birthdays, and quiet dinners, understanding that ordinary moments are often the most powerful after a lifetime filled with extraordinary highs and painful lows. Her goal was simple: to make sure the Presley family stayed united and cared for. By the time she reached 80, Priscilla had developed a philosophy shaped by everything she lived through. She believed that grief never disappears. It becomes a room inside you that you learn to walk through without falling apart. She believed that love never fully leaves. It becomes an echo you hear in certain moments, a reminder of what once mattered. And she believed that survival is not about pretending to be strong. It is about rebuilding yourself with honesty, accepting your scars, and choosing to move forward even when life has given you reasons to stop. Looking back, she did not see her story as a tragedy. She saw it as a transformation. She experienced early loss, public pressure, private heartbreak, betrayal, aging challenges, and the unimaginable pain of losing her grandson and daughter. Yet she still built a life of purpose, strength, kindness, and resilience. She remained elegant, thoughtful, and grounded through every chapter. She learned that reinvention is not about changing who you are, it is about discovering who you can still become. Her life showed that a person can be broken many times and still find ways to grow, to give, and to love. Her journey teaches that healing is never a straight line. It is a slow, patient decision repeated every day. Priscilla's story is not only about the shadow of a legend. It is about a woman who grew through trauma, found her independence, protected her family, and created meaning even in the darkest years. She turned pain into understanding, fear into strength, and responsibility into legacy. Because even now, after a lifetime of storms, one question remains, the one only her heart can answer.